Good evening, everyone. Before I call this meeting to order, I will ask everyone to please silence your cell phones and other electronic devices and remind council that our procedure bylaw forbids the use of cell phones during council and committee meetings. I'll call this council planning meeting to order at 6:30 p.m. by formally recognizing the traditional keepers of this land and specifically our neighbors of the Alderville First Nation with a formal territorial acknowledgement. We are meeting this evening on the Gunshot Treaty lands of 1788. It is on these lands and on the shores of the Big Lake that the Mississauga Anishinaabe met with the Crown to facilitate the opening of these lands for settlement. Let us be reminded of the responsibility we all have in making sure that we respect these lands and waters that give us life and sustain our livelihoods. I have a motion moved by Acting Deputy Mayor Rowley, seconded by Councillor Butwell, that Council approve the October 10th, 2023 Council Planning Meeting Agenda as presented. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Being none opposed, that motion's carried. Members of Council, do you have any declarations of pecuniary interest? And if so, please state the general nature thereof. And there are none noted. We have no registered delegations this evening. We have no statutory public meeting this evening, which brings us straight into staff reports. I had the wrong meeting up. Okay. Our first report is the draft official plan amendment to section 3.8 Parks and Recreation and a draft Parkland dedication bylaw. Director Walsh, we've read your report. Do you have anything to add or highlight?
Nothing further to add, Mayor.
Thank you. The motion before me is moved by Councillor Wright, and if it's okay with Councillor Wheeldon, seconded. That council receives the staff report dated October 10th, 2023 regarding a draft official plan amendment to section 3.8 Parks and Recreation and a draft Parkland dedication bylaw, and that the draft planning documents be given public notice for the purposes of consultation in accordance with regulations under the Planning Act, and that the draft planning documents be posted on the municipal website for the purposes of public consultation, and that public and agency comments be brought forward to council at the most available council session, including revised bylaws as appropriate for council's consideration. Is there any discussion? Councillor Ferretis.
To the chair, thank you, and perhaps to Director Walsh. I read this report, and I think my takeaway is that we are going to get greater contributions either as cash in lieu or as land set aside for parkland. That's kind of the intent of this.
That's correct, to the Mayor. The Master Parks and Rec plan indicated that we have a significant deficit in terms of parkland demand. And so we've taken a look at some of the population forecasts, and that deficit will become further entrenched. So there is a need to either some more land or purchase lands outright. And the Planning Act under Section 42 gives those tools to municipalities to make those efforts at the time of a development application. So we're widening the scope of the number of the types of development applications when we would be able to ask for parkland conveyance or payment in lieu of land conveyance, and also collecting more on the consent side of things than we have historically. And thirdly, introduce an alternative rate. The typical rate is 5% for residential development and 2% for non-residential. Generally speaking, that's the typical rate, standard rate. The alternative rate permitted by the Planning Act is 1 hectare of parkland per 600 residential units. And it only applies to residential development, doesn't apply to non-residential. Up to a maximum of acreage as specified in the bylaw. It varies a bit, but that's right out of the Act. It's fairly recent stuff, Bill 23. And so when staff took a look at some historical development approvals, it's apparent that alternative rate will be of some benefit to the municipality.
Follow up if I may. Thank you. Director, in reading your report here, it says with respect to non-residential developments, the municipality has waived the requirements for parkland dedication and payment in lieu in past. And the proposal now is that you're intending to capture those areas that were waived in past. And does that apply to the industrial park?
Through the mayor to council. Yes, we're going to apply to industrial commercial. However, exemptions would continue for the industrial park and similarly sized industrial. So in the bylaw, it's around 12 or 13,000 square foot industrial buildings that would remain exempt. And just unrelated to this question, if I may, Mayor, I forgot to mention that I would like to have a revised motion just to allow staff to give notice to active development applications about the Parkland dedication bylaw, and that when we give notice of the bylaw, that we include that set of persons. They're not prescribed under the act, so I'd like to be able to go beyond the planning act, and for regulation purposes, it would be useful to get direction from council in that regard.
So I've just drafted to be added to this with the mover and the seconder's permission after we've had some discussion that council authorized staff to provide these bylaws to the development community for comments. I think that captures it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Wheeldon unless yours is a supplementary.
Well, it's kind of a supplementary. It related to the 10%, 15%.
Okay, go
I was
ahead.
just hoping to get a little further clarification. As I understand it, it's 1 hectare land for 600 dwelling units. But here it says, however, a maximum of 10% of total value can be collected for 5 hectares or less, and 15% a maximum total land value that is greater than 5 hectares. Now, does that relate to the cash in lieu as opposed to the actual land set aside?
That relates to the payment in lieu.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so the alternative rate is really intended to deal with higher density developments where you put a lot more people in the neighborhood, and now there's more demand on the park. 5% may not always be enough, so they provide for this alternative rate for higher densities.
Thank you both. Councillor Wheeldon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. It's mentioned a few times in the report that land would be assessed professionally, and it's mentioned specifically that can be a bit of a bureaucratic process. It can provide delay, it has costs, etc. I'm wondering if it might be valuable to add a line or a small paragraph that says that for properties that were purchased within the last year, that it might be based on market value or purchase value as indicative of market value. I know purchase price is not always exactly the same as market value, but the very loosest definition of market value is whatever somebody is willing to pay for it. If somebody just bought it, then that's what it is. That's the value. So it might be a way of streamlining it if that is too onerous.
Through the mayor, I think that sounds like a reasonably good idea, because we do have access through the Impact website to look at sales. They do have a sales sub database in their data collection, and they have about 12 different sales codes, and one of which is whether that's an open market sale or not. And these are some of the codes that the appraisers actually will actually rely on. So I think that's a good thing, and I'll follow up in the follow-up staff report when this comes back.
Thank you both. As long as one corporation doesn't sell the land to another corporation owned by the same entities for $1, in which case we find ourselves in that quagmire of a recent land sale for $1. So whatever we write as an amendment to this will need to capture that the value, the market value of the sold piece of land in the past year has to be of a reasonable market rate, or that staff can trigger an assessment then, right? I think that's the fair way to go about it.
That latter would have been my recommendation.
Yeah. Thank you. Because enough land in this community gets sold for $1. And that's just what I know. And I know very little about land sales in our community. At the end of the day. Anything further for members of council? Keeping in mind, this will come back to us after we've received public and agency and developer comments. Councillor Butwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to the director. In various conversations that we've had in the last year or so, when the idea of pay in lieu of Parkland has come up, there seems to have been a sense or a vibe that we're no longer just going to be happy with taking the cash, that we would like to actually have Parkland. Is that a sentiment that is being put into this as well? Versus just an alternative, but that we really ultimately want the land.
Yes, I think it's clear we need the parkland, and so, for example, Applewood phase 3 and 4, when that was given draft approval, we did ask for the 5% and specified its location as well. And this was in advance of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. So there, yeah, the parkland space is short on what the master plan is actually calling for now. So yes, staff in working with the director of Parks and Rec, we've talked about, we've heard locations. We look at the municipality broken up into different neighborhoods bounded by railways and arterial highways, for example, as kind of barriers for people in wanting to be active, as pedestrians or bicyclists in a safe fashion. Then that kind of starts telling us where we might want to have that 1 hectare park area. And then of course, the other category of park asks for fairly larger parks over 1 hectare. So that we have the 3 classes as referenced in the report. Less emphasis on parkettes. At the planning conference, I heard some mixed reviews on parkettes. Some seem to like them because it's just a really convenient destination for dog walkers. And it happens to be where there can be a lot of face-to-face, how do you do? And the people know each other by the dog's name more than their first, that sort of interaction, which seems to be common and encouraged in general. But so we'll work with the master parks plan and maybe identifying at the time of development application what the director of Parks and Rec feels is a good location. And ideally we would maybe cite those locations in advance, and we'll make those efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Anything further? Acting Deputy Mayor Rowley.
Just wondering, Mr. Walsh, how will this affect existing developments at this stage? Speaking again of Applewood, is this grandfathered in then once we have this bylaw passed, whenever that happens, so we're not able to go back to what's being developed at this stage, to go back to ask for a bit more land or a few more dollars?
Yeah, the Planning Act actually outlines the timing of claiming the parkland or the payment in lieu, and it really doesn't give grandfathering. We can't go back, and once we pass the bylaw, we can't go back to existing developments. Now, if the bylaw has been set up that in the event that there is a lapsing and they're asking for an extension, then we can, I feel, ask for it at that time. It might be a hard ask given that they've been draft approved and are moving along expeditiously. So we'll have to be, use our best judgment at that time and see what we can do. Yeah.
Thank you both. Councillor Wheeldon.
Thank you, Mayor. I have 2 comments on the report itself. One of them is when you compare to surrounding municipalities, I just noticed that there was a big jump. Quinte West is listed as $700 on average, and Belleville at $7,500. And so I was wondering if I was reading one of those two terms or if they are in fact that different.
Yeah, through the mayor to Councilor Whelan, yes, they are in fact that different. In dialogue with the Director of Planning Development with Quinny West, he said that they're very dated with their numbers and are doing a review. Almost everybody on that list, other than the County of Prince Edward and the City of Belleville, are reviewing it. And I think maybe the City of Belleville might also be reviewing it, but the Prince Edward County number is a recent number. That is a result. They originally were introducing a straight 5% of appraisal rate per lot. And but ultimately, after public consultation, they went to a flat rate. And you see Coburg is kind of what our bylaw is doing. They just have the standard rate. Similar with Port Hope, they do have an alternative rate in there. But the others, yeah, I think they're all probably looking at updating. I know Trent Hills has expressed interest too, and the county planning group is getting together tomorrow, and this is on the agenda.
It's worth noting that the average building lot goes somewhere between $150,000 and $200,000. If it were $200,000, 5% would be roughly 20 times what we currently collect. So even if we had properties that were purchased for $30,000, we'd still be way further ahead having that 5%. The other point I had about the report here, Director Walsh, I think it's just a typo. I can just email you about it.
Appreciate that. I think I did find it underneath that table.
Thank you both for that. Anything further from members of council? All those in favor? Oh, wait, before we do that, I'm with your permission, Councillor Wright, we're going to add a fifth line to this motion that reads that council authorize staff to provide these bylaws to the development community for comments, as we heard from the director. You okay with that? They're just looking for authorization to do so. Councillor Wheeldon as a seconder, you okay with that? So that is the only change to the motion that I read originally. All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. CAO Job Ad in draft. This was circulated to members of council. You're seeing it in its original form. No changes were made based on the comments that I received back because I was getting too many comments back and we were about to hold a council meeting by email. And so I said, nope, we're going to bring this to council and we'll deal with it tonight. So as the the manager of human resources unavailable this evening, I see that it was reviewed by the clerk. Do you have any comments on this at all, Madam Clerk? I didn't think you would. Motion before me is moved by Councillor Butwell, seconded by Councillor Fredis, that council receive the attached draft job advertisement for the CAO's recruitment for review, edits as necessary. So I'll open the floor to members of council and we'll start chatting about what we want to do. I know I've received comments from Councillor Fredis.
To the chair, thank you. I think, yes, I did. I copied all members of council on my suggestions. I surveyed a number of other municipalities' job posting descriptions for the CAO. Essex, Orangeville, Rideau Lakes, Peterborough, Glengarry, and Stouffville, to name a few. There was a striking similarity between a number of them, probably because they used a template from somewhere. But the one thing I noticed that they did not do is an Indigenous acknowledgement. And instead, in that kind of second paragraph, they focused on promoting or advertising the municipality as a way of enticing and attracting job seekers. And I kind of favor us going in that direction. For what it's worth, because I am sensitive to that Indigenous acknowledgement, and let me explain why. My late first wife was part First Nations, and the rest of her family is 100% First Nations. So I'm a little sensitive to that whole thing, And I reached out to the few aunts and uncles and cousins that were left to get their perspective. And their view kind of surprised me a little bit, which is why I made this recommendation. They're all in favor of Indigenous First Nation acknowledgements in council meetings and major municipal events. But when you start to put it into something like a job posting, which is really just a marketing piece to hire a position, they feel it dilutes the whole thing and it becomes less genuine and not readily as readily recognized and accepted going forward. So it dilutes it. That's their consensus view and hence my recommendation. I'm not married to the words that we would use to promote Brighton, to make it more attractive in the job description. I'm flexible there, whatever somebody comes up with something better than my little thing. The only other little tweaks were relating to making it a little more positive rather than helping to foster workplace culture to enhancing the workplace culture. And rather than well positioning, change it to say well maintaining, so that we appear to be there already and we're looking to build on it. Just an observation on my part.
I'm going to speak to part one of your discussion, and because I totally agree with your part two, changing certain words around to boost things up rather than leave them flat. I have no issue adding a paragraph or a sentence or two for promotion, but I do think we should leave the Indigenous acknowledgement in place. So I don't think there's a problem adding to this. I don't think and maybe we don't want to leave the whole land acknowledgement in there. We can leave a portion of it in there, or maybe we want to leave the whole thing in there. I leave that up to council. But I agree with you. I think we should add a little promo in there piece and then acknowledge that we recognize the lands we are on are the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Anishinaabe. I don't think it needs to be one or the other, to be quite frank. Councillor Wheeldon.
Thank you, Mayor. To that point, I think that the most important part of acknowledging Indigenous territory here is just simply acknowledging the territory. And so it might be as simple as Municipality of Brighton is a lower tier municipality in the county of Northumberland on traditional Mississauga territory governed by the Gunshot Treaty. So that we are situated, it is expressly described as treaty territory, acknowledged in that way without necessarily needing the entire, that was just my thought.
I actually think that's a good thought. I would think we would be better acknowledging that we're governed by the Williams treaties and then put the specific date in there, because the Gunshot Treaty predates the Williams Treaty under which we are actually supposed to be living into relations with. So
Fair.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Yeah.
You can see me over here.
Councillor Butwell, pardon me.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I think it's also important that we acknowledge in some way, perhaps, like you said, maybe not the entire thing. And I can agree that it can be diluted over time if we're just throwing it into everything without thought. Just to that point, on the secondary page, there is a word in there that that was raised. So where are we? Fourth line down, diverse stakeholders. So that is stakeholder is a word that I am trying to get out of using, out of habit, because it literally means you claim land by putting something in the corner, a rock or whatnot, and just claiming land is taking land. So just in light of our conversation about at the front end of our posting, perhaps there might be a more appropriate word than stakeholders that we could use.
Citizens.
Diverse citizens, yeah, diverse interest, to foster partnerships with diverse peoples, communities,
Community members.
community members, yeah. it's just, it is a word that I was made aware of at one point, and I'm slowly trying to edit it out of my vocabulary.
Any issue replacing community members with other way around, with the word stakeholders with the words community members? Everyone okay? Okay. Anyone else? Councillor Fredis?
To the chair, thank you. Just one other observation. The last sentence says you are a trustworthy leader who demonstrates openness, trust, et cetera, and it kind of replicates some of what we say in paragraph 4. And I wonder if it might not be better to bring paragraph 4 and this last sentence together, perhaps expand it a bit to cover all of the aspects, but kind of put the two together, because this kind of dangles out there by itself at the end.
Could we just remove the word trustworthy in that last sentence?
Maybe you are, even just, you demonstrate openness, trust, ethics.
Want to do that? That solves the duplication of the wording as well. Yeah. Anyone else? And I think Councillor Wielden, in your email, that was one of your concerns, the duplication of wording from one line to the next. Anyone else? Go ahead, Councillor Wright.
Sorry, did we determine what the first sentence was going to be? Like, has that already been altered with? Because to me, that first sentence is just so run on.
Yeah.
It just makes my brain jump.
Did you have, Councillor Fredis, did you have wording for your promotional line so that maybe we can reword that whole first paragraph tonight and then be done? Yeah, what is it? Yes, I would actually. And then I'll read it. And then I'll give it to Candace. Brighton is home to Presqu'île Provincial Park, with which Canadian Geographic describes as the gem on the shore of Lake Ontario, just inviting tourists to explore its beautiful sandy beaches, magnificent walking trails, and abundant animal life. Brighton also has a diverse and vibrant agricultural sector and is in the heart of Eastern Ontario, Apple Belt, which it celebrates annually with the Apple Festival that attracts tourists from far and wide. It's a bit wordy if we start adding everything together. So I do like how this begins, located along the beautiful shores of Lake Ontario. And I wouldn't say conveniently placed, I would say conveniently along the 401 between Toronto and Kingston. Toronto, yeah, because Ottawa is not along the 401. Period. Brighton is home to Presqu'île Provincial Park, which I would just say, which is the gem, which is a gem on the shores of Lake Ontario. Brighton also has a diverse and vibrant agricultural sector, and it is in the heart of Eastern Ontario's Apple Belt, which we celebrate annually with Apple Fest, period. We acknowledge that the municipality is located on the traditional Mississauga territory. Help me out with your word there. your words there, Councillor Wielden?
The,
Which is governed by the Williams Treaties of, and I'll find out, I can't remember the date.
I think it's 1926.
26 sounds right to me.
Yeah, which is traditional Mississauga territory governed by the Williams Treaty of 1926. Might be 1923. There were two, maybe it's both.
There were a number of treaties signed under that Williams helped the Crown attract. So ours was 23, 26. We'll figure out the date and make sure it's right. Does what I've said there, if we parse that together, does that work for everyone? And then we roll into the specifics with the little changes we've made tonight. So we'll ask the clerk to pass that information along. You and I can chat. We'll go over my notes. In fact, you and I, maybe you and I and Jennifer can chat, and then, oh, she's away. Good for her. Smart. So you and I will chat, get our notes together, and then fire it off to Jennifer. Which maybe you and I will chat, get our notes together, fire it off to council to make sure we've got it right. And then once we know it's right, we'll send it off to Jennifer for her to add and get the job ad out early next week. Fair? Everyone okay? So Councillor Butwell, Councillor Fredis, we're going to add as amended. And if there's nothing further, all those in favor? Being none opposed, that motion is carried. I know I have this by email, but I'm going to keep the physical copy, okay? We have no items for information purposes. We have nothing listed under unfinished business. There are no bylaws to consider this evening, so I will ask if there's anyone present on Zoom or in person, Wayne, who has any questions with regard to tonight's agenda, and you're good to go. So we will take a 10-minute recess before proceeding into closed. You want me to read? You want me to write? Okay, so I'll read the motion to go into closed, then we will take a 10-minute recess, and I'll remind anybody watching on YouTube that when we go into closed session, the YouTube session will end and we will not return to the YouTube session when we come out of the closed session. Motion is moved by Councillor Fredis, seconded by Councillor Butwell. The council resolve itself into closed session October 10th, 2023 at 7:03 p.m. pursuant to the Ontario Municipal Act, R.S.O. 2001 as amended. Subsection 239(2)B, personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board members. Updates on bylaw enforcement property standards issues. And C, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality or local board. Offer of potential purchase and land banking, 2 properties for consideration. Is there any discussion? All in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. We will take a 10-minute recess and reconvene at 7:13 p.m.